to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, April 13th, 2015, start of a brand new week. It's just as insane, actually worse than last week. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. I see we have a call waiting already, but I want to get into some of the news here, and then I'll start taking phone calls here. Turning to the situation in Yemen, U.S. widens role in Saudi-led campaign against Houthi rebels in Yemen. And basically the U.S. Is picking out the targets for the Saudis to attack, which tells us this is really being led by the U.S. The U.S., having botched its intervention a couple of years ago, is having to go back into Yemen a second time. They don't want you to realize that's what's going on, so they said, you Saudis, you pretend to lead this, we'll tell you what targets to hit. Now, over the weekend, it came out, pardon me, the Saudi airstrikes are not just targeting the Houthis, but Yemen military units still loyal to the former Yemen President Saleh, who was ousted by that U.S. intervention back in 2012 and replaced by the U.S. puppet Hadi, who nobody in Yemen wants and is currently hiding out in Saudi Arabia while the U.S. and Saudi Arabia go back in and teach those Yemenite people that, by golly, you do not refuse your U.S. puppet ruler. Article out of Huffington Post basically describing Yemen for what it is. It is another failed U.S. military intervention. And that is what is going on over there. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call. Brian in Pennsylvania, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
All right, I don't know if you saw it, but I just saw it a little bit ago on RT. Russia lifted the embargo and are going to now start shipping the S-300 missile, air defense missile, to Iran.
Yes, I did see it. We were going to report on that, and Israel is having conniptions already. How dare you give Iran the means to resist Israeli attacks? That's not the way these things are supposed to do. Don't you understand these rules we just made up, where we have all the weapons and we can attack people and they're not allowed to fight back?
That's what I thought was really funny is Bibi's out there like losing his brains already, but it's just a defense missile. It's like, why would you be mad over a defensive issue? It's like, we're defending ourselves legitimately. We're not bombing you guys, so why would you be mad that we're defending ourselves?
Well, because, you know, Israel's been pushing for an attack on Iran for decades now, as long as American sons and daughters have to catch all those bullets at the front lines. And that's exactly what this is. Israel does not want Iran able to withstand an Israeli/U.S. attack. And once again, we see Putin taking moves to try and calm down the war fever by giving Iran defensive weapon systems, and the S-300 is very, very capable. It's going to be able to lock onto and take down those U.S. and Israeli jets.
Yeah, it has I think like a 350-kilometer range, which is, there's no ceiling that could be covered by that. There's no plane that we have that, or the world has, that could ever withstand that missile system, basically.
Well, the Russians learned a hard lesson during the days of the U-2, and so all of their air defense rockets are designed to exceed the ceiling of warplanes. Now, reconnaissance planes and satellites obviously is another story entirely. Whether it could actually intercept an incoming ballistic missile, I'm not sure about that either, because at least up until recently, Russia has been constrained by the ABM treaty, even though we know the United States is already violating the terms of the ABM treaty, which led to that horrible tragedy over there off Long Island with TWA 800.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you today about, Mike. All right. Thanks for letting me on the air.
All right, you got it. Thank you very much for the phone call. And we're going to go ahead and take a quick phone call from David in Florida. Aloha, David. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey. Actually, I was calling about the police officer that shot this guy in the back.
Yes.
And my father was a Detroit cop.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up putting a bullet in his own chest for whatever reason. We'll never really know.
Actually, that's unfortunately rather common for police officers. There's a high suicide rate there, and maybe it's because they're taking more of these antidepressants than the regular population.
This was 1985 that he killed himself.
Okay, we can rule out the antidepressants then.
Yeah, because, I mean, it wasn't really prevalent back then and everything, just the stress of the job. And that job is stressful. So I was a corrections officer for many, many years. I do private security now, and the job is stressful.
Okay, well, let's get back to the topic that you called in on. You're talking about the...
Yeah, I mean, police in the police in this country have, where's the line drawn to where crime and punishment meet the, where's the line at?
Well, the police are not supposed to punish criminals. They're only supposed to...
No, because this officer that, I cried. I mean, I literally I was ready to drop to my knees when he tased this guy, and next thing I know, he put 9 shots in him running away. Okay, somebody running away. Law enforcement is not supposed to do that.
No, they do it all the time. What made this case special is the police came out with a story about how the guy had grabbed the taser, the officer feared for his life, the media ran with it, and then a couple of days later the video surfaced showing that the police and the corporate media were lying to us, and that's what has made this. It's like Nixon used to say, it isn't the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up, and that's exactly what's happening here, okay?
And I'm just saying that, you know what, I come from both sides. I come from law enforcement and crime and punishment. So I've been on both sides. I've been in 2.5 nights in jail.
Okay, well, what is the point you're trying to make? You seem to be kind of rambling all over. And
well, yeah, it's just like I'm trying, where's the meeting point? Where's people start to think that they don't, in law enforcement, I just don't understand. I mean, why does law enforcement try to think they're judge, executioner, and jury?
Well, at the moment they're being trained to be that way. David, we're almost to a commercial break. I'm going to let you go. And David, next time you call in, try and sort of plan in advance what you want to say and how you're going to get there. So thank you for the phone call. And we're going to grab Dustin in New Jersey before the commercial break. Aloha, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, can you hold me over through the commercial?
Yeah, but we got about 2 minutes to go.
Yeah, listen, this is about fascism. It has nothing to do with racism or, this is plain and simple fascism. You got MRAPs going to the police, assault weapons going to the police. They're built like, something from Iraq War. And this is all about the economy. It's based around the economy, and they're getting ready for a potential collapse. And that's the reason. You don't need MRAPs to deliver a summons.
No, you really don't. And, this is part of the government's planning to keep us American citizens in our place when the economy does implode and the American people stand up and say, as is their right to the federal government, you are fired, get out of here. And that is not only inherent in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, it is recognized under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations, the right to self-determination. If the people determine their central government is not acting in the best interest of that nation and those people, they can get a new government. And that's our old government doesn't want to give up the perks. They don't want to give up the hot and cold running interns. Don't want to give up all the money being poured on them by lobbyists and corporations. And that's why they're spending so much of our tax money to basically kill us. And they will gladly kill 25% of the American people if it guarantees the surviving 75% will be willing, obedient slaves from then on. That's the way they think. I've been watching HBO's Game of Thrones, and not just for the beautiful naked women. The writing on that show about power politics is very, very good. And yes, it's set in a fantasy world, but like most good TV shows, it's using that fantasy world to make comments about what's going on in the real world. And that is why I really appreciate the show. Dustin, do you need to stay over?
Yeah, I wanted to mention one more topic.
All right, we're going to put you on hold, and we'll be back after these commercials. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go right back to the phones. Dustin, in New Jersey, you had one more point you wanted to make.
Yeah, Mike, can I go back to the police for a minute?
Sure.
Dates and times change, but people don't. And as long as you got certain people that are power tripping, you're always going to have this. You can go way back throughout history and you see evidence to this. Imagine we had a video camera in high definition back in the Roman days. You know?
Yeah, I mean, most governments try and operate out of the view of the population, substituting instead a very carefully manufactured illusion of divine right and imperial grace and the rest of it. But again, there's also the law of the hierarchy, which means in any organized structure, whether it's a company or a government, the lower levels inherit the manners and morality of the people at the very top. When you have just leadership, you will have a just police force and court system. When you have a power-mad, money-junkie, corrupted leadership, the police will eventually reflect that, and that's what's going on here.
Well, you know what the fail is on fascism in general or any of these systems? That the more you try to dominate a society, the more people are just going to resent it because, you know, you're just going to start treating everybody like crap.
Yeah, well, and all these societies, you know, they have a built-in self-destruct mechanism, which are those private central banks that feed the greed of those at the top. And
I wanted to change topics. Did you hear anything about Taiwan? China rejected Taiwan out of the AIIB?
I had not heard that. I know they're only just now starting to process applications and accept them, but I don't know if Taiwan was rejected or not. I'll take a look for that at the next commercial break.
And on the S-300 that they're selling Iran now, China's getting the S-400, which means Russia must be ready to roll out the S-500. Maybe they finish sooner with it than they expected.
Well, I imagine, I mean, all these countries are looking at U.S. warmongering, and they're boosting their military budgets. They're accelerating their development. Now, during times of peace, we know that weapons procurement is all about the money. But even looking at U.S. history, when we finally actually got into World War I and World War II, everybody snapped to and said, okay, we've actually got to produce working weapons for the money that we're getting. That was what made Harry Truman so famous before he became president, was he was out there at the forefront of the Congress just chastising all these defense industries that were taking all this money and just wasting it and squandering it and producing junk, and he slapped them upside of the head. And, you know, a big part of the U.S. eventual quality of weapons in World War II was started by Harry Truman.
And, yeah, I mean, with the S-400, I mean, Russia's given China, like, their almost latest, I mean, for them to do that, you know, that's amazing.
Well, Russia's not expecting China to attack them anytime soon, or for Russia to need to attack China anytime soon. Everybody knows who's starting this new world war. It is the United States. It is its allies enslaved to these private central banks. Everybody knows it, and they're drawing battle lines accordingly.
All right, thank you, Mike.
All right, we're going to grab John in Barbados real quick. John, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yeah, I'm looking at the situation in Iran and Russia's announcement that they're going to supply the S-300 defensive missile. But look, reading between the lines, looks like they've offered the Iranians the S-400 for that order of S-300s, and it's a game changer.
It is a game changer. Well, see, there's another aspect to the S-300 deal. This deal was actually agreed to many years ago, back before the U.S. started all this warmongering, and we were still friends with the Russian republics, and the U.S. said, please don't actually deliver these to Iran, and Russia agreed. And so Putin has signed a decree saying the ban is lifted, and it's basically Putin's way of telling the United States, you know, we're really not going to listen to you guys anymore.
Well, I think, as I say, they've offered the latest one, the S-400, to replace the S-300. But anyway, going further in this game changer, just as America announces that they can now deliver the bunker buster bomb to Iran, and Israel looks likely to try and go it alone, and now Iran has the means to really defend itself with some of the best anti-aircraft missiles on the planet.
Well, that's why Netanyahu's jumping up and down and screaming and kicking the office furniture, because, you know, he wanted Iran to be just staked out helpless on the desert while he goes in there and just, you know, bombs the heck out of them, like they had done in Iraq. And now, because of Putin's lifting of the ban, Iran is not going to be the cakewalk that Iraq was, and Iraq wasn't even that easy. That's why we're still mired in that war.
Well, I'm looking, I always read between the lines. I think this sort of statement is never made by these high-ranking politicians unless the deal's already done. There's probably already S-300s inside Iran.
I imagine they're being airlifted in and deployed right now. And once again, we're seeing Putin trying to basically deter this rush to war. And we've seen it in Syria, we've seen it in Ukraine, now we're seeing it in Iran. Russia does not want a new global war. They have spent a lot of time and money building for commerce, products that manufactured, agriculture, and they're becoming an economic powerhouse, which is why the U.S. is out there to destroy them. The same rationale that Winston Churchill had in the 1930s for destroying the newly resurgent Germany. We can't compete with them, therefore we will bomb them and the world will come back and do business with us.
Now, moving on to Ukraine with the announcement from this group in Odessa that they are declaring their independence and joining the Donbass republics, the Lugansk and Donetsk republics, as a single unit. Things are not going too well for Victoria Nuland and Barack Obama in their little move to enshrine and encircle Russia.
Well, it's even worse than that because we're seeing more and more indications from the nations of Europe. They've had enough of this anti-Russia coalition, and they're talking about dropping out. Germany's out there saying that this has harmed their economy way too much, and they are not in favor of continuing the anti-Russian sanctions. This whole New World War, Europe and the U.S. against Russia, it's already falling apart before it really gets going. Thank goodness, because if it really gets going, there will be nuclear weapons exchanged.
And the latest that I've heard, yesterday, or was it this morning, I don't know, Greece and Turkey finally signed that new pipeline deal. It's going ahead, definitely.
Yes. And it's going to bypass Ukraine in order to remove Poroshenko's ability to shut valves to Europe to get Europe to go on supporting him and loaning him money because it's a losing proposition. Poroshenko is not going to succeed in this. Europe is now recognizing that, and everybody's sort of settling back and saying, all right, how are we going to deal with this aftermath? John, we're hitting a commercial break. I need to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get on back to more phone calls, a couple of stories I need to get to. We're seeing Saudi Arabia being told by the United States what to attack inside Yemen. They're bombing the Houthi positions and Yemen military resources under the control of Yemen military who are still loyal to former President Saleh, who was ousted by the U.S. intervention back in 2012. So this is not about Houthi rebels or anything like that. This is the U.S. going in through a proxy and slapping the Yemen people down for daring to think that they could run their country without U.S. puppet rule. And it's getting embarrassing for the United States. They've had to go into Iraq for the third time. They've had to go into Libya for the second time, had to go into Yemen for the second time. This model of imperial conquest isn't holding together any longer. Now, everyone's talking about a potential ground invasion. The people inside Yemen are saying, you wait till those Saudis come across the border, and that's when we're going to even things out a little bit. May not happen. Saudi Arabia's run into a little bit of a problem because most of the forces they are employing in Yemen are mercenaries. They don't risk their own precious Saudi children. They're spending a fortune to go on out and hire mercenaries. The pilots doing the bombing in Yemen on behalf of Saudi Arabia and the U.S. are primarily from Pakistan. The mid and low-level officers are mainly from Jordan, and here's where it gets sticky. Most of the rank-and-file soldiers that Saudi Arabia has available to them are originally from Yemen. It's going to be a little hard to get them ginned up to go back into their own home country and start killing people and blowing things up. Now, the Russian Navy sent in a ship to evacuate 308 people from Yemen of basically all nationalities, including some Americans. And I'll come back to that in just a little bit. 2 Russian airplanes have evacuated an additional 350 people from Yemen, flew out from Sana'a. And again, American citizens were on board those planes. What did we hear from the U.S. State Department? We can't be bothered. We don't have the resources to evacuate Americans from Yemen. You're on your own. Try and get out any way you can, which the Americans apparently are doing courtesy of the Russian republics. I think the real reason the U.S. abandoned those Americans inside Yemen, they were hoping for some American bloody shirts to wag at us so that they could come out from behind the shadow of Saudi Arabia and say, yes, we're going to go into Yemen and clean that place up. And pay no attention to what we did back in 2012 here. Because this is ISIS, and ISIS is the reason we can go into countries over and over and over and over again until they see the wisdom of accepting U.S. puppet rule. Now, turning to Ukraine, developments there. The East Ukrainian authorities are keeping a tally of all the violations of the ceasefire, and we know over the weekend, Kiev uncorked on the east with major artillery. And so far, there are 66 documented violations of the ceasefire over a period of just 24 hours. One Ukrainian artillery shell hit the Donetsk hospital. And over Donetsk, Kiev detonated what's called a Tochka-U ballistic missile. Major explosion. It detonated at an altitude of 1,200 meters. So it actually did relatively little damage as compared to what it could have done had it hit at ground level. And they're not sure if this was simply a symbolic detonation or if, in fact, the rockets themselves are old enough to be going out of spec and it detonated prematurely. Kiev apparently attempted a tank attack on the Donetsk airport, which got bogged down, and they're still thrashing around over there. Now, there's a video that is surfaced of drunken Ukrainian, meaning Kiev soldiers, shelling Slavyansk. They think it's great fun. They're out there, they're drinking, they're pulling the lanyard on the artillery. And more than 20 children have been killed so far. And they made a trophy video. Look what we're doing, Mom, here. Boom. And it's getting even worse for Poroshenko because we're seeing reports here, this is out of TASS, that some of Kiev's forces are actually becoming hostile to other Kiev forces. There are conflicts going on over who is supposed to be in jurisdiction of what territory, and there are now confrontations between Ukrainian regular units and the volunteer battalions, and even among separate units within Ukraine's armed forces. It's all falling apart. There is apparently a lack of a unified chain of command, and that, of course, goes all the way up to Poroshenko himself, who is not a military commander. He's master of organized crime, and he makes a decent chocolate. And unfortunately, all of the officials in Ukraine who would be in a position of keeping control of the military, they've all gotten really depressed in recent weeks and committed suicide. Now, down in Syria, okay, according to an official with the European Union, there are 6,000 Europeans fighting alongside the Takfiri militants in Syria, meaning what we have here are more hired mercenaries. This is all being driven by mercenaries. Guess who gets to pay for it all here? Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting. Saudi Arabia is feeling their oats. They've got a new ruler who wants to prove how butch he is. And apparently Saudi Arabia and Turkey are now discussing, amazingly enough, an alliance focused on ousting Syria's President Bashar al-Assad, which the U.S. has been trying and failing to do for going on 4 years now. What this is all about is shutting down the Arab Spring. Now, that term gets misused a lot, but what the Arab Spring was all about were these Arab nations kicking out foreign puppet rulers. And if there's one thing all those foreign nations can agree on, it's reimposing that puppet rule. And that's why you're seeing these unlikely alliances come together. Countries who normally would be hostile to each other, because the one thing they're in agreement on is ending this idea of the people of a nation thinking they can run their nation for themselves. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. DJ in Georgia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Yes.
Yes, so I wanted to talk about Saudi Arabia bombing Yemen, the military action there. A story that I don't know if you've covered it yet is that Russia has their citizens there. There's, business people and citizens that are nationals that are there. And Russia had evacuated over 300, which is, I think, all that they had recently. But the U.S. has over 3,000 to 4,000 citizens there that have not been evacuated and are getting bombed.
Yes.
And I think the Arab Anti-Defamation League is actually suing the U.S. State Department because the U.S. actually refused to evacuate or offer support. And the ironic part is Russia actually evacuated some of those U.S. people.
Yes, we just reported that.
Oh, you did? Okay. Well, I just wanted to add one more thing to that, is that if Saudi Arabia uses, actually there are U.S. Air Force refuelers that they refill in the Saudi jets while they're doing these bombing runs, and if they somehow bomb and kill and any Americans get killed as a result of the bombing, then the U.S. is partly at fault for killing their own American citizens because they
they'll just blame it on the other side and say, oh, these poor Americans were killed. Doesn't it make you want to invade? DJ, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Finland and Sweden are not currently members of NATO, but have announced their desire to have closer cooperation with NATO, possibly leading to membership. Russia's foreign ministry has expressed concern about this, and the reason for their concern is explained if you look at a globe of the Earth, not a Mercator map, because in those polar regions, distances are distorted. Go to Google Earth and just take a look, because if Finland and Sweden are on our side in a coming confrontation with Russia, they're going to be in a position to greatly interfere with Russia's access to the North Atlantic. And that's why Moscow is very, very concerned about that. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Steve in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just got an email from Newsmax that talks about Putin lists ban on selling missiles to Iran, the S-300 air defense missile systems. I think this, how do you think this is going to go over in that region? Israel's not going to be happy about it.
Oh, they're not. They're not. Netanyahu's already screaming.
Yeah. So do you think we're going to slap more sanctions on Russia again? Is that what's going to happen? What's going to happen there with this?
They'll certainly slap more sanctions on Iran. At this point, the sanctions on Russia have backfired so badly that the European support for continuing the sanctions is already fragmenting. But certainly those members of Congress who want to add more sanctions to Iran to push closer to that war with Iran that Israel has told them and paid them to start. So that'll be a good excuse. Oh, my goodness, Iran is arming up. Well, it is a defensive air system. And with both Israel and the U.S. talking about bombing Iran's civilian power station, nobody can say that Iran does not have a right to protect their critical infrastructure against outside attack.
I agree.
Okay?
Totally agree. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Now then, turning on down to Israel, a couple of interesting stories happened over the weekend. Settlers from the Lashem settlement to the west of Salfit have taken control of an archaeological site located on the lands of two Palestinian towns. And they're basically saying, we have a right to take this away from you because this is an archaeological site, and, we own the archaeology, you don't. You're not allowed to have archaeology in your town, or some such nonsense. And it basically underscores the critical importance that archaeology plays in Israel's political justification of displacing the Palestinians. And so, tied in with that story is an event that happened over the weekend where Islamic State group destroys the ancient ruins of Nimrud. And supposedly there's been another one of these videos found on the jihadi websites that nobody seems to know where they are except for Site Intelligence Group, and basically bulldozing some of the archaeological ruins of Nimrud. Gosh darn those evil ISIL people. How dare they do that? Well, why would they do that? They're in the middle of a war. Resources are short. Why are they wasting time, money, and explosives demolishing ancient archaeological ruins? And the explanation is very simple. Israel's claim to the lands of the Palestinians rest on this biblical myth about the kingdoms of David and Solomon and the first temple, for which there is no hard archaeological evidence. The two artifacts that were shown to the world, the pomegranate temple staff and the Jehoash tablet, both turned out to be fakes. And for Israel, which is saying we have a right to this land because we have these amazing kingdoms long ago that just vanished into thin air, the archaeological wonders of its neighboring nations are a major embarrassment. You cannot take two steps in Iran, Iraq, or Egypt, or any of those places without literally stumbling over the hard archaeological evidence of those ancient civilizations. In fact, over in Egypt recently, they found a new temple because cows in a pasture, just walking around, punched through the ground and opened it up. Another temple, they were digging a trench for a water main. They found another temple. As much as they found in Egypt, they think they've only found 1/3 of what's there to be found. And so for Israel, this is a major problem because lots of proof of their ancient civilizations in Egypt, lots of proof of ancient civilizations in Iran, lots of proof of ancient civilizations in Iraq. In Jerusalem, not much before the time of the Romans. And so Israel's political agenda is to level the playing field, to erase as much as possible the archaeological evidence of other people's ancient cultures, so the contrast between them and Israel is not as obvious. This is why when the United States invaded Baghdad, they had armed forces protecting that oil ministry, and the Baghdad Museum was left wide open for looting. The U.S. built part of a military base over the remains of the city of Ur. You can't get to it any longer. And we have seen throughout history, conquering nations will erase traces of their predecessors. And that's why ISIS, which we now know is working with and supported by Israel, is doing this, why they're destroying all of these ancient sites. All right. Supposedly on Wednesday, the IAEA and Iran are going to hold the first of the so-called technical meetings, trying to move from the framework agreement to a final agreement. They're already saying that if they make enough progress, they may slip that June deadline a little bit. And, of course, Israel's saying, no, forget bomb them now. Tom Cotton, who's one of Israel's war cheerleaders in the Congress, saying that this Iran deal, this will lead to nuclear war. We can't have a peace deal with Iran because that will bring nuclear war. How much more Orwell can this guy get? You know, he wants a war with Iran now, because if we wait, it'll be a nuclear war. Iran has not launched a war of aggression against another country in over 200 years. It is not their nature. They're just minding their own business, trying to mind their own business. And over in the Jerusalem Post, they had another interview saying that Israel needs to find the right time to stop Iran's nuclear program. And remember, Iran stopped Iraq's nuclear program, flew into the country, blew up the power station at Osirak, screaming, there's a weapons factory underneath it. And if anybody should know about hiding a weapons factory under a power station, it is Israel, because they've done it at Dimona. And following the invasion of 2003, international inspectors examined the wreckage of the power station at Osirak, and all they found was a power station. Israel's batting zero, finding other people's weapons programs. So why are so many members of Congress listening to Israel now regarding Iran? Well, because they're paid to, and very generously. Now, the Zionist Union has come out saying that a final deal with Iran has to include authorization for Israel to attack Iran if Israel feels the nuclear deal has been violated, which means all Israel has to do is produce another phony laptop of death and attack Iran before anybody can say, hey, let's take another look at this, and claim to be legally in the right. We had evidence that Iran was in violation of the deal, and that gives us the right under the terms of the P5+1 to go ahead and attack. Now, there was a big stink last week about an article that appeared in the Times of Israel calling for genocide against the Palestinians and anybody who opposes Israel. The article was pulled, and a story put out that it was actually a hoax where somebody was using somebody else's name. Maybe, maybe not. A lot of fraud going on. Apparently, there's been a second such article that appeared in the Times of Israel calling for the genocide of the Palestinians. Prompted a huge outcry. Times of Israel has pulled that one. But what they're doing by putting out these articles and then yanking them is they're trying to sell this idea that genocide against the Palestinians is now an acceptable topic of conversation. Coming up on the top of the hour news break, you remember that mystery Russian submarine off the coast of Sweden? Everybody was looking for it, and the Swedish Defense Ministry got a 6 billion kroner a hike in defense spending. It turns out that mystery Russian sub was in fact an ordinary workboat. There was no submarine. The boat was confused with the conning tower of a submarine. Wave activity made it look like it was surfacing and disappearing. Look at all that money the Defense Ministry got over that goof. We've got to take a break for the news. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. On Fox News, they're running a banner headline, waiting for Mark Rubio to announce his candidacy for president. Well, if they've been leaking it all over the place, it's a non-story. We know he's running. Big deal. Why do we have to watch the official announcement? I don't think so. Now, on the SRN break, you heard about how Jodi Arias was sentenced to life without possibility of parole. Another judicial decision that doesn't seem to be getting a lot of corporate media coverage, and that is that a federal judge has sentenced 4 former Blackwater mercenaries to very long prison sentences for their role in a 2007 Baghdad shooting incident that left 17 Iraqis dead and 14 wounded. And that one doesn't seem to get the media play that Jodi Arias does. Are we being conditized again? I think possibly so. Down in Brazil, 100,000 protesters have taken to the streets demanding the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff. They're not happy with the way their country is being run. Welcome to our world. Meanwhile, victims of illegal drone strikes in the Mideast are starting to file lawsuit over this, and one of their targets is Germany, because under European Union law, member nations are supposed to oppose and ban the practice of extrajudicial targeted killings, and to make sure the member states do not perpetrate unlawful targeted killings or facilitate such killings by other states. And here's the wrinkle. A lot of the drone strikes the U.S. launched into Pakistan and Yemen and other places originated at Ramstein Air Base. And so Germany, under European Union law, is now liable for a massive lawsuit. And I'm sure the courts will find some reason to dismiss it, but it's important to constantly underscore the fact that all of these wars of aggression are not only violations of international law, they're violations of the laws of the nations carrying these crimes out. Article out of Investment Watch blog. The war cycles are accelerating. War creates more debt, more commodity inflation, less personal freedom, and more profit for bankers in the military-industrial complex. Wars will become more common and far more costly. We're seeing that. The number of wars ongoing is increasing and accelerating. They're in a rush to get this thing really going before the economy implodes, which some are saying is likely to happen before September. Now, the director of the CIA is out there saying the war on terror will never end. We will be in a constant state of war for as long as the earth is here. Permanent war for permanent profit, permanent control over the people. He's ambitious. Even the Project for the New American Century only called for 100 years of American war against the rest of the world, and now the head of the CIA is saying, it's forever, a permanent state of war. Won't it be fun? Now, the Inside Intelligence Group has come out with yet another very slickly produced video of ISIS threatening to burn America like 9/11. We're stronger than we were in 9/11. We're already in place. They're wagging 9/11 at us again. If there is a Big Bang anywhere, and frankly, I think the fact that the public is so skeptical of these things is why we have not had another one. But they're out there trying to sell the idea and get us all afraid of terrorism, get us in the proper state of mind to perpetrate another false flag, and they're not able to get there. They're not getting the traction with the American people. Because we've been lied to so many times. So many hoaxes. I mean, this Sunday is the 19th, the anniversary of the Waco disaster, the bombing, false flag bombing of the Oklahoma City Murrah Federal Building. The stuff keeps coming up over and over and over again. I mean, following the guilty verdict for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the web just lit up with everybody reposting all this proof about these other operatives there at Boston, who very clearly have a much stronger evidentiary link to the bombing than the Tsarnaev brothers did. The one thing the Internet has done is given human civilization a collective memory operating outside government control. We decide what history is going to be. We decide what we remember. And what we remember is how many times government has lied to us, defrauded us, hoaxed us to get what they want. Now, we all remember the situation out at the Bundy Ranch, the standoff, which sort of fizzled out and went nowhere, when the Bureau of Land Management saw just how angry the population was getting. There's another one getting ready to happen. And this is up in Oregon, in the extreme southwest corner, involving the Galice Mining District. Now, this is a collective of mining claims that have been in effect since 1876. And it's one of the richest gold fields in the United States of America. So the Bureau of Land Management has come in and issued 2 stop orders, claiming they have the authority themselves under the 3809 regulations to basically take over the gold mine. They do not have a legal court order. They do have the assistance of the local sheriff, who is not known for his adherence to the Constitution. And what's going on here is very, very simple. The Federal Reserve is being called on by other nations, other banks, other individuals to start repatriating the gold bullion in their vaults, and they don't have it. So the U.S. is basically, through the Bureau of Land Management, they're going to start commandeering the domestic gold mines in order to loot them. I mean, there's so much gold in that part of Oregon. Kids are still finding it in the rivers, just running around the gravel with their hands. They're coming up with nuggets. And I would remind everybody, the Enclave Clause in the Constitution forbids the U.S. government from owning or controlling any lands other than those underneath federal buildings, military bases, or federal infrastructure such as harbors and airports. And the Founding Fathers put that in there specifically to prevent the federal government from getting out of a self-created economic mess by simply commandeering the people's land and selling it, leasing it, pledging it as collateral, which is what's going on here. Now, when Nixon ended gold convertibility for the Federal Reserve note, the Nixon shock, it created doubts in the minds of other governments and banks that the U.S. actually had all the gold they claimed to have pledged as collateral on government borrowing. So Richard Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency to bypass the Enclave Clause and start grabbing vast amounts of public lands away from the American people, who are its true owners, and pledge them as collateral for more borrowing. And they broke it up in all these little different programs, wilderness zones, roadless areas, wetlands, heritage rivers, all these different programs to try and conceal the scale of the land grab going on. But it's almost 25% of the entire country has now been grabbed by the federal government to be pledged as collateral on government borrowing. And now they're trying to do it with the gold mine. It's going to kick up a huge, huge fuss. We're trying to get a representative of this mining district on the show to talk about this. Until they get the guns, they can't come after the gold held by the American citizens, so they're going to go after the gold mines because they're in trouble. The New York Fed doesn't have all the gold bullion that was placed there, entrusted to them by other powers. They weren't supposed to take that gold and play financial games with it, but they did because they're money junkies, and now they're stuck. They can't get the gold back. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now we're talking about the economy. The European Central Bank is seeing risks in Greece's planned home foreclosure law. Actually, right now, the ECB is seeing risks in everything Greece is doing. And apparently, the ECB, IMF, EU Commission were caught off guard by Greece's strong stance. They were apparently thinking that if they blustered and bluffed and threatened enough that Greece, the new government of Greece, would cave in and go back to the old system, and so far it hasn't. Now, Greece is beginning what they're calling a debt audit. And what the debt audit is going to do is go through and identify those debts which are legitimate for the Greek people to be responsible for, and those portions of the debt that come under the category of odious debt. And I guarantee you will hear not a word about this in the corporate media, because the corporate media has been given their marching orders by the money junkies. All debt is sacrosanct. You never, ever, ever question it, no matter how it came to be. More and more people are saying it's only a matter of time before Greece defaults. Greece could simply print up a whole new bunch of drachmas, trade them to the Greek people for the euros they're currently holding, ship the euros back to Europe and say, here, that's all you're going to get, and leave the European Union. And Russia has rolled out the red carpeting for them. And where the European Union and the globalists and the New World Order have really blown their strategy was as soon as they started bringing in these countries to their little regional unions, they started abusing them, beating up on them, looting them, while there was still an attractive alternative in the world. They couldn't wait to profit from all of this. The European Union was created with a built-in self-destruct mechanism called the European Central Bank. Story out of Zero Hedge. We've come to the end of the road. Greece prepares for default. It's reported in the Financial Times. Now, Greece succeeded in making a payment this last week on its loans and interest. But there's another one coming up that is far larger, 2.5 billion euros. There's absolutely no way they can come up with that. And again, from the point of view of the IMF and the ECB, they cannot cut Greece any slack on their debt, or every other member nation of the EU will want the same. And if there's one consistent feature about the money junkies, they never write off debt willingly. They never cut anybody any slack. Now, the Bundesbank is warning German banks to expect at least a 50% loss on what's called the Austrian Black Swan. And they're basically looking at the bond performance in Austria. They're looking at the fact that Austria just ended government insurance of savings accounts as an indication that Austria is in serious, as yet publicly unacknowledged difficulty. Now, here's a very interesting article over in Russia Today. Apparently, U.S. memos were leaked saying that the U.S. is getting ready to evaluate the special relationship with Great Britain. I know we wish they'd reevaluate the special relationship with Israel. But in this case, right now, Washington, D.C. is getting upset with Great Britain because Great Britain is starting to act a little more independently than the U.S. would like. The geopolitics have changed. Great Britain is signing on with these alternative currency and banking systems. Great Britain is refusing to the final merge with the EU. And so the U.S. is getting ready to say, well, we have to they refuse to do as they're told, so we're going to reevaluate our special relationship. Over the weekend, there was a major conference, actually it was on Friday, major conference about just how much harm the special relationship with Israel causes the United States, primarily the American taxpayer. C-SPAN has covered this conference previously. They chickened out this time, but it is available for replay. The highlights on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Up in Montreal, major protests there against austerity. The world is starting to recognize their one common enemy, and it's not Iran, it's not Russia, it's not ISIS, it is private central banks. And I think that if the people of all of these nations are going to be coerced into having to fight somebody to put their lives on the line in a war, it is our inherent right to decide for ourselves who the enemy is. That has to be considered a fundamental right. I will decide for myself who my enemies are. And it's not Putin, it's not Iran, it's not even ISIS, who are a bunch of costumed actors and a video production crew, tricking you into yet another war started by hoaxes. Here in the United States, 47% of all households are living paycheck to paycheck, cannot save any money whatsoever. Now, as the dollar falls, as fall it must, law of gravity will not be denied, economists are predicting the United States of America, no longer the greatest nation on earth, already down to 12th by some estimates, will be reduced to second or third world conditions. Now, the money junkies are going to do fine. They're going to have their palaces and their little enclaves set up. But for the rest of us, whose work built this nation, nothing left over for us. Story out of Oraz.com undermining that when wages and salaries are kept low, taxpayers end up with the rest of the bill. Remember not too long ago when McDonald's literally issued an instruction pamphlet to their own employees how to apply for food stamps so that they could survive on the low wages and salaries. And that's kind of a really messed up deal when these giant wealthy corporations basically make money off of us, then turn around and say, you have to pay for our workers to live. Talk about outright obvious fascism. Now, up in New York, Andrew Cuomo had this program, the New York is Open campaign, trying to lure businesses to the state. Unfortunately, because of a tendency to tinker with such things, there were a lot of restrictions on this program. You had to bring in certain skill levels to certain parts of New York, and then you would get a tax break. So far, this program has generated a grand total of 76 jobs in the entire state. Cuomo spent $28 million just advertising this program. That comes out to $368,000 in advertising costs for every job created. And then they wonder why we don't think this government is well managed here. More stories from California, dogs being killed by the government over unpaid fines. It's getting ugly out there. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And a caller mentioned this earlier in the program, and during the break I got a confirmation. Yes, indeed, China has rejected Taiwan's bid to be a founding member of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And it's a little bit of a snub, and there's a way around it. China has told Taiwan that it will favorably consider the application as long as Taiwan uses the name Taiwan on the application. Taiwan officially calls itself the Republic of China, which has been an ongoing sore point for mainland China. And so what China is telling Taiwan is, if you will just not use that offensive name on the paperwork, it's probably going to go through. Alrighty, now, here's an article that's been floating around here. City economist says the solutions to the current economic problems is to abolish all cash. Okay? That if we just ban cash and everything is handled electronically, that will fix the economic problems. No, it won't. It absolutely won't. And they're trying to sell this idea of a cashless society by saying, well, criminals use cash and terrorists use cash and so forth and so on. That's not what's going on. When the money is inside a bank's computer, it can be used immediately to prop up their requirements for cash reserves. They look better on the ledgers. When you take money out of a bank and you put it in your pocket, they can't play games with it. Their ledgers ease toward the red if they're not already in there. And so what they want is to come up with a system where you pay for everything with plastic and the money leaves a computer in one bank and instantaneously appears in the computer at another bank where it can go on being used to prop up requirements for cash reserves. Money in your pocket is of no use to the banking system. That's what this is all about, along with, of course, the government being able to track everything that you buy, which is going to be really uncomfortable for people who go to adult book and video stores, or who are stopping for a jelly donut on the way home from work, even though they're supposed to be on a diet. And it's a complete violation of privacy. But the real agenda here is they need to keep all the cash, all of it, inside their banking computers to keep the bookkeeping straight and not let you have any money in your pocket for any amount of time. That's what's really going on. And you know, the problem with it is it's not going to alter the ultimate outcome. This is another hastily thought up stopgap measure to hold off the impending crash. And the crash is going to happen anyway because nobody inside the economic system, nobody inside the government has the courage to stand up and face the real cause of all these problems. Privately owned central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, which by design creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt swamps the entire system. Nobody has the gonadal tissue to stand up and say, this is the cause of all the problems, this is the cause of all the wars. So they just keep coming up with more and more schemes and scams and adjustments to try and keep this little pyramid scheme going just a little tiny bit longer until they retire and somebody else is in office to take the blame for it. But everybody in the financial system and everybody in the federal government who has perpetuated this for the last 100 years shares the blame equally for the crash that is about to come. It's already crashing all over the world. They're just trying to find any way they can paper it over and make it look like it's still running. They're still screaming, we've got a recovery. The indications are, no, there's no recovery. There's no growth in this country. We're in a full-on depression. They don't want to use that word. They keep coming up with new words. It's not a depression. It's a recession. It's not as bad. It's not, it's not a crash. It's a slump. It's a decline. They're trying to weasel word out of their way out of the fact that we're in worse economic situations right now than this country was in during the 1930s. And they're going to try and get out of this situation the same way they did in the 1930s, get into a world war. Either fix the economy or at the very least distract everyone from it and say, oh, the hardships are all because of those Nazis or those Russians. It's not our fault. We're politicians. We're blameless here. Now, speaking of blameless politicians, as you know, yesterday, Hillary Clinton launched officially her 2016 campaign. Shock to nobody. They've been telegraphing it for years now. And I love this little headline from Government Slaves. Hillary Clinton launches 2016 campaign on a mountain of dead former associates and endless scandals. I mean, we got to be honest. I still can't believe the Democrats are going to back this lady. She's carrying more baggage than Kim Kardashian on a photo shoot. And even the Russian government is saying it's really too early to see if this is going to go anywhere. And by the way, it's now official. Hillary's campaign is going to respond to all criticism and questioning of her with the accusation you're being sexist. What about the cattle futures trades? Oh, you're just being a sexist. You're a woman hater. Everybody does cattle futures trades. You just got lucky. You're just being a sexist. You hate women. I don't love or hate people based on their gender. I love my wife. Quite a bit, in fact. My opposition to Hillary are the scandals, the travel office firings, Vince Foster, Iran-Contra, Whitewater, Flowerwood, Castle Grande, Morgan Guarantee, the Arkansas Development Finance Authority. None of those has anything to do with her gender or color or orientation or religion. It's her behavior that is the issue. But Hillary's campaign, that's going to be their one-stop shop for deflecting criticism. You're being a sexist. You hate women. You're a male chauvinist pig. To try and shout down criticism and doubt. Not going to work because we know that's what they're doing. Same game that Israel plays with comments and criticism. Oh, you're a Jew hater. You're an anti-Semite. But we've seen it so many times we understand. It is, as that former member of the Knesset told Amy Goodman, it's just a trick to shut you up. Well, we will not be silenced about Hillary Clinton or any of these other candidates. I'm not seeing anybody in the running yet that I think actually is qualified for the job of president or would do a good job for our country and our people. It's just more of the same lineup of Wall Street and Israeli and military-industrial complex, big pharmaceutical lackeys. Now, remember, back in 2007, as a senator, Hillary Clinton voted for a neocon amendment supporting an attack on Iran. She's going into this campaign with a history of warmongering. Back in 2002, she was out there actively campaigning to help sell the war on Iraq. Hillary, there were no nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Are you going to talk about that? Or are you just going to scream I'm being a sexist woman hater for bringing it up? I mean, she does have a lot of baggage. And apparently her spokesman is saying, oh, by the time the election's around, this is going to be old news. That's another one of the dodges that she's used throughout the years. Oh, that's already settled. It's old news. I don't have to talk about it. And we have Hillary Clinton's role in the wars in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Ukraine, her profiting off of Boeing while marketing Boeing weapons as Secretary of State. Her transformation of the State Department into a fully owned subsidiary of the military, her foundations taking money from Chevron and ExxonMobil while she persuaded European countries not to ban fracking. Hillary has backed and supported Israel's war crimes, opposed the UN and international law. It goes on and on and on and on. More about Hillary when we come. I ought to call her Hillary. Hillary Clinton. That's the new name. We'll be back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the race for the presidency, which is still, it's a year and a half away, and already they're getting. I think in the blueprint for the new America, we need to confine the interval of time for candidates to campaign, because especially for the incumbents, aren't they supposed to be doing other jobs? They're already out there campaigning. They're on the campaign trail, out there with their hand out to lobbyists and AIPAC and Israel. The government's for sale. Now, when this country was started, there were strict limits on the amount of money individuals or companies could donate to a political campaign, under the theory that the size of a campaign's war chest was a true measure of their popular support. But with all these recent corruption-encouraging legislations, popular support isn't even a factor any longer. You go and you look at the campaign finance reports from these major candidates that are all dominated by corporations. They're actually getting very little from ordinary people. They don't even care. You're not coughing up enough money for them to even be concerned about. So Hillary is officially in the race, and we're talking about a lady who exposed the nation to outside spying by the handling of her email, has obviously obstructed justice in destroying the data on her email server, turning over a selected by her stack of paper emails to make electronic searching impossible. This was a lady who got fired off the Watergate Committee for ethical violations. And I'm sure that Hillary supporters are going to be screaming, oh, you're just a woman hater, you're a sexist, you think only men should be the president. No, I'd be in favor of a woman president, but let's get one who's qualified. Linda Lingle, for example, who was governor here in Hawaii, and she knows the job. And when John McCain was running, and he got Caribou Barbie, which basically self-destructed his campaign, I don't remember at the time, getting in touch with McCain's campaign and with Linda Lingle saying, look, great that you're going to want a female vice president. But how about getting somebody who knows the job rather than a beauty pageant queen? And I will grant you, Linda Lingle doesn't look as good in a bikini, but she knows the job. If Linda Lingle was running for president, I would support her and I'd vote for her. But I'm absolutely adamant that Hillary be kept from that White House because of her policies that she's stated out there. Quote, protecting Israel's future is not simply a question of policy for me, it's personal. I've talked with some of you I've known for a while about the first trip Bill and I took to Israel, yada, 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 yada. She's another in a long line of Israel whores. Have we not had enough of a government run for the benefit of a foreign power? The Yemenites kicked out their foreign puppet rulers. So did the Iraqis. So did the Libyans. It's time for the U.S. to do the same. Article out of Raw Story. Foreign donations to Clinton Foundation land Hillary in hot water. Now, Hillary is already trying to distance herself from the Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, claiming that this is all her husband's doing and she doesn't really have anything to do with that. And yet we've seen this linkage between donations to the foundation and Hillary's policies, like the one about fracking. Huge donations from Chevron and Exxon to the Clinton Foundation at the same time she's putting pressure, as Secretary of State, on European nations not to ban fracking. Of course it's dirty money. And the Clintons are not the first person to cover up their corruption by saying, oh, it's a nonprofit charitable foundation. Now, as I'm looking at the Fox News, they're still waiting for Mark Rubio to show up and announce he's running for president, which we already know. And he's grandstanding, trying to build tension and pressure for the official announcement. Who cares anymore? Now, some things you ought to know about Mark Rubio. First of all, his political mentor is Jeb Bush. Rubio is one of the GOP's younger politicians, which I don't hold against him, but it doesn't seem to suggest he's really got a lot of experience. He just looks good. He looks good in his suit. He's got great hair. He's been kind of waffling on immigration. He's probably going to make foreign policy a central issue of his campaign. And frankly, any candidate who isn't addressing foreign policy in the wars is not going to be listened to. They're promoting him as a presidential candidate because of his appeal to the young, which is a very slight dig at Hillary, who is getting a little long in the tooth. Let's be honest about that. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz is out there campaigning away, and he's pandering to some of the worst instincts in his potential voters. He was up in Iowa, and he was at this homeschool forum. And he's out there telling the Iowa voters, gays are waging jihad against Christians. I can't imagine there are very many Christians who are going to applaud that. It's nonsensical. I mean, certainly there's a segment of Christians that are waging jihad against the gays. And Ted Cruz seems to be ignorant of the First Amendment and the prohibition against recognizing an official religion of this country. Meanwhile, Jeb Bush has gone on the attack against Obama, chastising Obama for meeting Raul Castro, at the Summit of the Americas while having snubbed Netanyahu. And Jeb Bush is out there, he's tweeting, why legitimize a cruel dictator of a repressive regime? Well, Jeb, since you've obviously not been paying attention, Castro did not try and upstage Obama with a grandstanding speech before Congress. Castro hasn't had his hand out every year for billions of taxpayer dollars while building a nuclear arsenal that makes all that financial aid illegal under U.S. law. And whereas Israel has started war after war after war, creating a mess in the Middle East that Israel demands the U.S. clean up, Castro's been pretty much minding his own business. Build a great public health care system that the U.S. could profit copying. And if you don't understand those differences, Jeb Bush, you are far too stupid to be president. I'm getting sick of campaigns that are nothing but sloganeering and jingoism and short on actual substance. Where it seems to be we're getting another one. However, latest poll by Bloomberg says that only 42% of Republicans would never consider voting for Jeb Bush. I know they're all out there trying to push Rand Paul as the new boy wonder, and he's trying to prove that he's up-to-date and modern. Apparently he's taking Bitcoin in his campaign donations. All right, we're almost at the top of the hour. News break. Story out of Blacklisted News. As the trial of the century comes to a close, meaning the Tsarnaev trial, we're left with few answers to nagging questions about the FBI and the Tsarnaevs. And they're talking, first of all, about the information that has surfaced, that the Tsarnaevs were assets of both the FBI and the CIA. We know they were framed for the bombing. We've seen the proof ourselves. If Judy Clark had brought this evidence before the jury, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev would have been acquitted. But she didn't do that. She stood up in front of the jury after Dzhokhar Tsarnaev pled not guilty, and she told the jury, yeah, he did it. What kind of a defense attorney does that? She ought to be disbarred. And remember, Judy Clark is the government-appointed attorney for all of these patsies to make sure they get railroaded into prison, to make sure that the official story is not challenged in a court of law. That was her job. Another article out of thephaser.com. 20 years later, facts about the Oklahoma City bombing that go unreported. Later in the week, we'll be getting back into this, and Waco. The U.S. government is carrying a huge burden of past hoaxes, lies, fraud, and deception that now stand exposed before the American people. And they can't ever admit they were wrong or lied about one, or the whole mess will unravel. It's only a matter of time before something happens they can't cover up or explain away. When we come back from the news, Obama was certainly telling the truth for once about his commitment to disarming the American people. We'll be back with that in a bit. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. And as I mentioned before we went to the news break, Obama, and for that matter, the entire U.S. government and the money junkies are still trying to figure out ways to infringe on that which shall not be infringed. And so we're looking at the story over at 12160.info, how the ATF has had a recent history of passing rather arbitrary rules, regulations that tend to come back and bite them. And they've had to reverse decisions a couple of times. Their agenda is to find some way to take all the guns. And their latest spin is they're going to evade all of these inadvertent conflicts and contradictions by redefining what constitutes sporting use of firearms, to narrow it down, saying the only acceptable sporting use of firearms is this caliber, this kind of weapon, these kind of paper targets, these kind of bullets, and anything else is banned. Now, first of all, I have read the Second Amendment many, many times. There's nothing in there about sporting use, or for that matter, even hunting. The Second Amendment is written specifically in terms of military weapons. And the reason the Founding Fathers gave us that Second Amendment was to give the people the means to hold an oppressive government in check. That's what it's there for. Thomas Jefferson wrote out. The Second Amendment is about giving the government a reason to leave the people alone. And the United States Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Miller that the Second Amendment reserves to the American people the same weapons carried by the regular uniformed military. If they've got 30-round clips, we're allowed 30-round clips. If they have multiple rails on the front of their gun, we're allowed multiple rails on the front of our gun. Because the Second Amendment isn't about sporting, and it's not about hunting. Those uses of firearms were so ubiquitous, they were taken for granted. Nobody who was writing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights felt there was a need to go in there and say that people will be allowed target weapons or hunting weapons. Hunting was indispensable in colonial times. You couldn't survive through the winter without it, and obviously you have to have target shooting in order to develop your skills as a hunter. Those were a given. The Second Amendment is about giving the people force of arms equal to the central government to keep the central government behaving itself. The Second Amendment is the teeth behind the other 9 amendments in the Bill of Rights. That's what it's there for. And the government likes to weasel word their way around things by saying, well, we're going to redefine what this means. And in this case, they're redefining a term that doesn't even appear in the Bill of Rights, sporting use. It's not there. Now, here's a piece of propaganda that came out. I saw it in a live leak, but it's popping up all over the place. The government now claims to have research that shows the number of guns you own is linked to your ability to manage anger. And this is obviously trying to lay the groundwork to say that each household is limited to just 1 gun, so that we don't have extra guns to give to our friends and neighbors or to those military veterans who have been denied their Second Amendment rights because they came back from the war zones with their minds partially melted by these antidepressants. That's what this was about. Now, what part of shall not be infringed are they not getting? They know they're violating the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They don't care anymore. They've become very wealthy, very powerful. They don't want anybody to spoil the party. Certainly not the people of the United States of America, who've got to be taught to accept their puppet rulers the same way that Iraq and Libya and Yemen have to. And this idea that the number of guns that you own indicates you've got anger management issues, I question that. What about people who collect guns for historical reasons? Doesn't mean they've got anger management issues. What about people who just like to build guns? The black powder community, which I used to be heavily involved in. Doesn't mean I've got anger management issues. It means I like making things out of wood and metal that go bang. I make other things that don't go bang. It's just part of wanting to be a craftsman. Redevelop those survival skills that our parents' generation had, that the present generation has pretty much lost. How to grow food, how to be a blacksmith. Things that will be of tremendous value when there's a major economic crash. And all of those corporations and government agencies we've been forced to depend on for our survival are simply not there any longer. So let's talk about human-caused global warming. Apparently, they still have winter over in Lebanon. Snowing over there around Beirut. This is, according to my Casio, April 13th. Let's see, Longmont is looking at snow possible by Wednesday. More snow expected in the high mountains of Washington State. Snow could hit Colorado Springs this week. It's a very long, lingering, delayed spring. Winter hit early this last fall, staying long this spring. But that's not going to stop the global warming activists and the carbon Nazis and out there. And this is a funny story here. Apparently, there were thousands of Canadian eco-activists protesting global warming in Quebec, marching through the snow. you know, banging their hands together trying to say, stop global warming, stop global warming. I mean, that's how ridiculous they're getting on this whole situation. Now, last week we talked about this report that came out claiming there was a warm blob in the Pacific Ocean. Beware of the blob. And so today we're seeing another story saying the warm blob in the Pacific Ocean is the reason New England had all that snow and ice. Now, a little science. If you have a tank of cold water and you find some way to inject a blob of hot water into the middle of it, like with a turkey baster, it will not stay there because of convection. And in the ocean, you've got currents. A persistent warm blob in the Pacific Ocean is likely the heat plume from an undersea volcano, which means human activity's got nothing to do with it. But they're going to seize on this and say, see, there's a warm blob, and that's the reason why we had this cold and ice in New England, and why you should not question the divinely revealed dogma of human-caused global warming. And they've been doing this for the last several record-setting winters. Every time we have another record-setting winter, they've got another reason why we should not let the snow and ice cause us to doubt human-caused global warming. Oh, well, the heat is hiding at the bottom of the ocean, which proves they don't know about convection or the second law of thermodynamics. Or it was hiding in the Arctic, or it was over here, and it's there. And the way they anthropomorphize heat into a new evil monster betrays the fact that they really are clueless about science, or at the very least, they're assuming that you are, that you don't understand thermodynamics or convection. And the fact that if there's a warm blob in the Pacific Ocean, why isn't it creating warmer weather in New England? They got some idiot in a white lab coat who got a very generous funding check to say, oh yes, warm water in the Pacific is why we had snow and ice for the 7th year in a row on the New England coast, and you should never, ever, ever doubt, ever, 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 human-caused global warming. The world is broiling. It's your fault. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about human-caused global warming, probably one of the biggest and most obvious and most exposed hoaxes perpetrated on the people of planet Earth by governments, corporations, scientists, agencies, even the United Nations, the IPCC, are part and parcel of this. Now, back in the 1990s, when this got going, the world was in fact warming. And a common trick for politicians to do is to take something that's just happening naturally, declare it to be a crisis, declare it to be an emergency, declare it to be all the fault of you taxpayers, and then use it to trick you out of more money and obedience to whatever their agenda happens to be. And very alarmingly, some of the global warming people up at the United Nations are now saying the only way to save planet Earth is massive population reduction. Probably been down there at the Georgia Guidestones saying the ideal human population is only 500 million. Well, if this world war gets going, it'll be a moot point because the human population is going to be maybe 20 or 30. Which is not enough of a gene pool to rebuild the population here. Up in Ontario, Premier Kathleen Wynne is signing an agreement to join Quebec in a cap-and-trade system, carbon credits. I wonder how heavily Kathleen is invested in this system, because everybody who got in on the ground floor made or thought they were going to make a huge amount of money, although a lot of the U.S.-based carbon trading companies have now gone out of business. But remember, Al Gore was broke when he ended his presidential campaign against George W. Bush, and now he's a multimillionaire, wanted to be a billionaire, wanted to be the world's first carbon billionaire. Now here's another story out of grist.org. Climate change is the ultimate gentrifier. Now, the word gentrification refers to taking areas that are decayed and squalid and finding some way to scrape them clean and start overbuilding nicer communities. It's always very dangerous politically, and there's a very interesting quote. Former Louisiana State Representative Richard Baker, following Hurricane Katrina, saying we finally cleaned up all that public housing. We couldn't do it, but God did. It's a good thing when the poor lose their homes and are driven to other parts of the country, because now we're gentrified. It's beautiful here. Terrible elsewhere, but we just want it to be beautiful here. Do you realize corruption in the medical industrial complex has reached absurd levels here in the United States of America, where cosmetic surgery is considered perfectly sane and acceptable, having plastic things put in here and put in there, and something taken out and something altered to make you look more beautiful, with beauty being a rather arbitrary definition created by those who sell products connected to that. But the desire to eat healthy has been defined as a mental illness. So, cosmetic surgery, which is big business, that's fine, that's okay, that's to be encouraged. Let's get these 13-year-old girls a boob job. But people who want to avoid chemically contaminated food, GMOs, fluoridated water, they're mentally ill. They're suffering from orthorexia nervosa, and we have a pill for that. We have a pill. If you'll take 3 of these daily, you'll love your McDonald's Big Mac. That's how twisted we've become. Surgery to change your body for purely appearance sake is okay. Wanting to eat a healthy, nutritious meal, no, that's a mental illness. You got to be seriously ill. Now, down in Australia, they're adopting a policy where any parents on welfare who refuse vaccinations for their children will be cut off of welfare. They'll have their payments stopped. Now, I want to remind everybody, they're out there saying, all these illnesses, all these epidemics, we've got to protect the children. Now, back in 1976, the U.S. government mandated vaccinations for the swine flu, and then had to cancel the program a quarter of the way in, when it turned out the swine flu vaccine was killing 50 times as many people as the swine flu itself. Today, the big push is for the measles vaccination because of all these measles epidemics, which, oddly enough, are hitting the children who've actually had the measles vaccine, which at the very least tells us the vaccines aren't working, or worse, are actually causing the illnesses. Every one of these measles outbreaks, between 90 and 99% of the kids coming down with measles had the vaccine. So we stick them with a needle, they get sick, we use the fact that they're sick to sell more of the same stuff. That's how the pharmaceutical companies are working. Now, so far, the United States Vaccine Court has acknowledged more than 100 deaths in the United States caused by the measles vaccine. According to the CDC, nobody has died of measles in the United States in the last 10 years. So what the heck is going on? Well, obviously, big pharmaceuticals are heavy campaign contributors, but there's an even larger issue behind that. All of these governments, Australia, U.S., Europe, their economies are in serious trouble. Tax revenues are drying up. And so the latest government dodge is to go out and force you to buy products you may not want, probably don't need, to stimulate the economy. We don't care if you think it's dangerous. The goal here is to keep the economy propped up a little longer while we pray for a miracle from the imaginary playmate in the sky. You will buy vaccines. You will buy this. You will have this on your car. You will have this in your home. The problem, of course, is the people have run out of money. We don't have the money to pay for vaccines. In fact, all of these hospitals who got tangled up in Obamacare, they're starting to complain. Because of those sky-high deductibles on those Obamacare-compliant policies, people are going to doctors and hospitals less than they were before. Because they just don't have the money. So the government can mandate all it wants, but if the people are out of money, the system is coming apart. All of these things we're seeing out there, new tax and new regulation, you must have this, you must have that. all of them fall apart if the people don't have the means to acquire the money to meet all of these new mandated obligations. And that's where the federal government has really failed, because in their rush to take money out of the top of the system, nobody figured out a way to guarantee that money went back down to the bottom. And that's why the entire pyramid is coming down. It's a failure of the federal government, period, end of discussion. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about science in general, stories here. Over on Kamchatka, there is a volcano, Shivaluk volcano. Its activity is now at what they call condition orange. It's pouring out volcanic ash over a distance of 319 kilometers and rising into the atmosphere. Now, you need to understand, when they call volcanic ash, it's a little misleading, because it's not ash like you would have in your fireplace, burned up paper or wood. It's actually very finely powdered glass particles, and it is very dangerous on a number of different fronts. If it's settling on your roof and doesn't slide off, it's much heavier than snow and ice. It can cave in roofs. A lot of that happened following Mount St. Helens. People who were well away from the actual volcano weren't keeping an eye on the buildup on their roofs, and the roofs caved in. The threat to airliners is twofold. First of all, when you fly into an ash cloud at cruising speed for a jetliner, it's an abrasive. And there has been a couple of incidents where aircraft will fly into these clouds without realizing it. It's at night. They'll see this weird green glow over the leading edges of the aircraft, and they basically come out of it with the windscreen on the cockpit sandblasted, fogged, unable to be seen through. And if the ash gets into the jet engines, it will melt. The engines are hot enough to revitrify the volcanic glass, and it starts coating engine parts until the engines shut down. So it is something that you do need to keep an eye on. And if it continues to go, I would imagine that probably not only here in Hawaii, but on the west coast of the United States, we're going to be in for some very spectacular sunsets. Now then, GMO Free USA has published the results of independent lab testing, which has documented Gerber Little Crunchies Veggie Dip Baked White Whole Grains Corn Toddler Snack contains high levels of herbicide-tolerant insecticide producing genetically engineered corn. So they're already feeding the GMOs to little tiny babies. Are we not supposed to be extra careful? I mean, we've talked a long time about how formaldehyde, it's a known carcinogen, can cause joint pain in susceptible people like my wife. And finally, they outlawed formaldehyde-based glue for baby shoes, but it's still used for adults because, we're old. It's not worth taking care of us. But now they're feeding GMOs to little, tiny, fragile babies because they're making money. Now, down in Brazil, around 1,000 female members of Brazil's landless workers movement, armed with sticks, broke into a cellulose company in Sao Paulo and destroyed millions of samples of genetically modified eucalyptus saplings. And they don't want it in their countries. And for very, very good reason. And remember, one of the big scandals that is going to be following Hillary into the campaign is how all these GMO companies were pouring money into the Clinton Foundation at the same time that Hillary was lobbying European nations not to ban GMOs and not to allow GMO labeling. Now, McDonald's is being forced to close their first restaurant in Russia. They're saying it's over a rent dispute. Other sources are saying that McDonald's is seeing a decline in business because of its image association with the United States of America. Be kind of like in the run-up to World War II, not expecting a German Hofbrau to do very well in the United States of America, which they didn't. Seeing another story out of the Wall Street Journal. U.S. agencies block technology exports for supercomputer in China. And basically, the U.S. government is forbidding Intel to send powerful computer chips to China out of concerns that China is building a supercomputer for nuclear weapons development, which is one of the applications for supercomputers. One of the first supercomputers here in the United States, Iliac 4, was built behind a public story that it was going to do accurate week-long weather forecasting, which it was never able to do. What it was really about was trying to do mathematical simulations of warhead detonations following the ban of both above-ground and later below-ground nuclear testing. That's a big application for these computers. What's really kind of interesting is I don't think this is going to stop China, because China has the ability to fabricate whatever chips they want in-country. So here we go. Now, over to Fukushima. A lot of news coming out of Fukushima. Story here that, let's see, tea, noodles, and chocolate bars from Fukushima will soon hit store shelves in Britain. And, of course, what we are hearing from the corporate media, from the government of Japan, is it's perfectly safe. There's don't need to worry anything about it at all. I'll wait to see a lab result of a radiation count, particularly for alpha emitters. Now, back on the 10th, TEPCO announced they were going to deploy a new, specially designed robot to try and go down into the remains of the reactors to look at the possibility of recovering the corium by robots. And it's this very exotic, hardened against radiation robotic snake that could weave over and around and get traction anywhere and deal with all the wreckage. And apparently it lasted a grand total of 3 hours before it simply stopped working. Now, the reality is that if in an intense radiation field, electronics stop working, the junctions between the various semiconductors where the work is actually getting done will start breaking down under intense neutron bombardment. And we know that nobody really knows how hot the centers of those reactors are. And we also know that TEPCO has been caught downplaying the amount of radiation by orders of magnitude. Now, over at the Daily Sheeple, they're reporting the media is finally acknowledging that radioisotopes identifiable as coming from Fukushima are washing up on the west coast of the North American continent. But it's not a problem. You can go swim in the water. It's not going to hurt you whatsoever. Remember when Ann Coulter was out there saying a little radiation was good for you? But Fukushima got hit with 168 times the Hiroshima bomb. And they've just been dumping all that water in the ocean. Fish get contaminated off of Fukushima. They're still just as contaminated when they arrive off San Diego. And that, too, has been documented. This is history's worst nuclear accident. There doesn't seem to be a thing they can do about it. It's all just theater. We've got to look like we're trying to solve the problem, even as they admit they can't. This is a real China syndrome times at least 3, possibly 4. Okay. Now then, apparently they had a water main burst in New York, flooded a subway tunnel, 12-inch water main at 13th Street and 7th Avenue, shutting down the trains in both directions. It's just a reminder, our infrastructure is crumbling. Crumbling. Now, speaking of water, another article out here. Fracking pollutes California water while individuals suffer. And it's hitting the point that one of the reasons California has a shortage of safe drinking and irrigation water is that 2 of the state's largest aquifers have been contaminated with 3 billion gallons of toxic fracking fluid. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the California water shortage, which, of course, is being blamed on human-caused global warming, and that's not it. California and most of the west of the United States are by nature desert. They are kept green through a very extensive artificial irrigation water distribution system, which has been allowed to sink into decay. Cracks in the system releasing millions of gallons of usable water in places that don't need it. The Western irrigation system is estimated to be delivering only 30% of what it delivered when it was first constructed. That's how much it's been allowed to decay. There's the fracking controversy. 2 of the state's largest aquifers are now contaminated with fracking toxins, and the water cannot be used for drinking or for irrigation, at least until the right bribe is paid to the right official. Story out of Investment Watch blog. Out in California, you can use a gallon of water to grow a single almond, and yes, that's how much it takes, but a long shower will land you in jail. Because when it comes to the people having proper hygiene and disease prevention, well, we don't need that. You know, if they get sick, then they'll be forced to buy from the medical industrial complex, and it will stimulate the economy, and it will produce tax revenues, and that's a good thing. The importance is protecting the agricultural corporations, and I'm not saying they don't need to be cared for, because it is a major part of the state's economy, but there needs to be a little bit of balance. And the California government really has lost any credibility in saying the almonds get the water and the Californians do not, because of their mishandling of the fracking and their continuing neglect of the existing water infrastructure. Now, a big issue for a lot of people in California are the bottled water companies. And the bottled water companies are just sucking water out of the aquifers. They process it, and in the process, 2 gallons of water are thrown down the drain for every 1 gallon that winds up in a plastic bottle or plastic bottles on the shelves of the supermarket. So apparently activists succeeded in at least temporarily shutting down one of those Nestle plants in California. Now remember, the CEO of Nestle is on record as saying water is not a natural right for human beings. It should be commoditized and commercialized and sold as a product. Next it'll be air. And here is the real kicker. Okay? The Desert Sun, California newspaper, did an investigation and discovered Nestle's permit to use California water for its bottled water product expired in 1988. 27 years ago. For 27 years, Nestle has been, without official permission, emptying the aquifers of California to put it on the supermarket shelves across America. And that is a failure of the California state government to take care of their people. Oh no, we've got to keep Nestle happy. They're campaign contributors. This is fascism. When you have government that is wholly on the side of corporate power against the general population, that is what fascism is. Now, the California Forest Service is trying to save face by saying, well, they're going to reassess the permit and it'll probably be reissued. We might have some restrictions or conditions on it. No, not going to happen. They'll just hand them a new permit, say it's retroactive back to 1988, go on sucking out the water, wasting most of it, and selling the rest at a profit. Nestle does not own that water. The people of California do. And American corporations, apparently having decided that actually creating something useful and new is just too much bother, they're now in the business of grabbing what's already out there and repackaging it for sale. There are already states in the United States where it has now been made illegal to collect rainwater on your own property. Oh, no, you can't touch that. That has to run off the roof and into the ground and into the aquifer so that Nestle can suck it back out, put it in a bottle, and sell it to you. Isn't America great? All right, we're going to take one more phone call here before the end of the show. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I didn't get to listen earlier, and I just sort of picked up off the Catch Archives, but you may have discussed this already, but did you do the story on the 150-plus melonhead whales that beach themselves on 2 different beaches in Japan?
No, actually, that was a little bit further on down the list. But, I mean, we're seeing wildlife die off all around the Pacific Basin, and nobody's really looking for a reason, because the reason's probably going to embarrass some corporation somewhere. Could be the radioactivity. We know that there's been a documented problem with all of these artificial hormones in birth control pills that get flushed down the toilet, and the unmetabolized component winds up in the ocean. It's affecting sea life. and their ability to reproduce.
Right. Well, the possible issue is that, like, 6 days prior to the Fukushima quake, there was a beaching of about 50 whales, and 2 days prior to the Christchurch quake, there was a beaching of whales in Australia. So, you know, I'm just wondering about the correlation. You know, it's sort of like we see, you know, the elephants head for the hills and the people head for the beaches. The tsunami to get drowned, and the elephants go to the hills. I think it's a good idea to keep an eye on what's happening in the animal kingdom. Yeah, this could, hopefully this isn't a harbinger of another coming big quake, but they're saying, oh, people shouldn't jump to that conclusion. It's unscientific. It's like, okay, yeah, it's unscientific, but perhaps it's worthy of note. Maybe we ought to keep an eye.
There's been a lot of research on that, and actually in China, they're using animals as earthquake predictors. There was an article we had on whatreallyhappened.com today where scientists are saying that the motion sensors in smartphones that are set down on tables, not being used, could actually be the basis of a global early warning system of earthquakes. You know, that would just make the current seismic net seem very crude in comparison. And that would be a good use of the technology. But, you know, we are seeing that volcano in Kamchatka. That could be a signal of something about to happen. And it is an earthquake-prone area all over there. And the beached whales could be signaling something's about to happen. But we won't know until we know. We won't know until the quake happens and the tsunami warnings will sound. Right.
Yeah, another possibility. I know the Navy sometimes does like BLF and ULF transmitter stuff on the ocean floor, which drives them batty. But
no. The VLF and ELF don't affect the whales. It's the super powerful Autex sonar that's been killing ocean life and driving them onto the shore. And I have no doubt they're probably out there testing that stuff right now, getting ready for a war with Russia and China. And who cares if we kill a bunch of whales? They're just in the way anyway. Submarines ram into whales and cause all kinds of damage. That actually happened to the first Alpha-class submarine the Russians produced. Was just going out on sea trials, and it rammed a right whale.
Typically the $85 range per person, and that's for a day.
Hello?
Do more than one class, then the price changes, of course, but...
Hello?
Actually, one class, and then it comes a month.
Okay, I was getting an audio feed there for a second, and so our caller just hung up there. The feed was coming in from him. Isn't technology wonderful when it isn't working? All right, getting on back to science. A couple more stories before the end of the show here. Sputnik News is reporting that NASA is now starting to acknowledge there are actually large glacial belts of water underneath the surface of Mars. There's a lot more water than they thought there was going to be, which isn't a surprise to those of us who worked on Viking, because one of my very favorite images from Viking 2 is one where there's snow, frost on the ground. Most likely a clathrate of water, ice, and frozen carbon dioxide. Here's another one of these little teasing stories coming out. NASA promises definitive evidence of alien life by 2025, which is nonsense because Dr. Gilbert Levin did that with Viking back in 1976. And the government, I guess, decided we weren't ready to learn about alien life. By the time they finally announce it, they're going to bore us to death with all these could have, may have been, might be. I mean, the evidence from Mars is overwhelming. Microbial mats, the little blueberries and everything. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get some animation work done, and pay some bills around here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Share what you know with everyone you know. Please tell them about whatreallyhappened.com and Genesis Communication on your social media. We're trying to build our audience and build our support because we don't get those big buck checks from the corporations to lie to you. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.